Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica. I'm your host. On today's show, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. You guys have been asking me over the last couple of weeks what would be my perfect window or who do I want to come in and all that kind of stuff. So, we're going to do a little play on that, talking about the 4 signings Arsenal must make in order to win the Premier League. So, make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, and get into the chat and let me know what you guys are thinking. Give me 1 second. I have like a glass of water down here that I'm gonna need because it is so hot. Like, I've been asking for the weather to change and it has, and now I'm regretting it very much so. Let's see what you guys are saying. Jasmine says hi, hello to you as well. Pap says hello to you as well. Arsenal Forever says Arsenal summer transfer window shouldn't be a window of compromise. It should be one of conviction. I like that statement. That's cool. I like that. Systems Matter says we need level raisers. I'm not convinced by Castagna. Fair enough. Systems Matter says, but I don't want Cancelo either. So who do you want? So who do you want then? Arsenal Forever says Timothy Castagna is a massive no. Magzino says, why are fans against Castagna? We have 3 players that can play right back in White, Tommy, Partey. He would just be backup and more of an attacking option. Yeah, it's, we're going to talk about that a little bit as well because, I have thoughts on how the right back position can be addressed. But before we get into anything, I did see something that I thought was good news. I know people are more concerned about who's the new players are going to be that are coming in. And of course, that is super important. But I was very happy to see that Tomiyasu, Zinchenko, Martinelli, and who else was it? Somebody else, El Neni, are all going to be available for preseason. Now, El Neni for me is not somebody that let's just put him to the side. We know what that's all about. But for Tomiyasu in particular, I know that some people are really down on Tommy, but I think that when he's fit, which is not that often, but when he is fit, he's such a good option to have. And I think towards the back end of the season, we'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about fullback options, but we didn't have the option really to go into a more sturdy, defensive minded defense, if that makes sense. I know it's well, your defense should be defensive minded, but we all know that we play with an inverted fullback. Zinchenko is a little bit more of a midfielder. And so we didn't have that option to go into the tall center backs at fullback type of formation, which I think was really useful against Liverpool. We never really got to use it again because Tommy got injured. So I love to see that he'll be in preseason. My biggest fear was that he wouldn't be available for preseason. And then once he got ready and fit again, he would go off to the Asia Cup. And we need as many players available and ready to go at the beginning of the season. I think all of us kind of knew Martinelli would be ready to go, Zinchenko as well. They had minor injuries. So for me, that's good news. I know that people are I'm just so it's all about the players that are going to come in, but it's also important to retain the players that we already have, which the contract extensions are great, and then players that are injured to come back ready to play. John P says, hi Jess, I'm okay with Castagna for 10 million if that means we get both Rice and Caicedo. Aha says Cancelo and Zinchenko in a back 4 together would be suicide surely. El Dennis says, if we get Rice and Caicedo, I really don't care about anybody else. I've seen a lot of people kind of say that. I think, yeah, Rice and Caicedo, the outlay that would require would mean that I think everybody has to understand that means that we probably won't get the most expensive players in other positions. I know somebody earlier was saying it shouldn't be a window of compromise, but I do think if you're bringing in 2 of the best up and coming central midfielders, you will compromise, you will. John P says, really, is Tommy fit? He will be fit for preseason, so he's probably not fit now. Systems Matter says, we need someone at right back that can handle left wing, which seems to be very good these days. We will talk about that. Systems Matter. All of that are things that, we're going to talk about in terms of the 4 players that we need to bring in. Now, some people will say 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm just going to go with 4 because I think that's the amount of players that are going to come in. And quite frankly, I don't think we need more than that. I think the reason why sometimes we feel like we need 6, 7, 8 players is because we're at, like, the manager isn't using the squad to the best of his ability. And it's not to shade Mikel Arteta at all. Like, I think he's done a really good job, but one area of improvement might be using the squad better, because I've said this many times, but I think the fan base has been gaslit into thinking that the players that are on the bench don't have any quality. And I think it's just we don't see them enough. They don't get enough minutes. And so they don't have like that ability to, they don't have the consistency to work off of when they come off of the bench. They're only really used if it's injury enforced, and that's not good enough. So I actually think that that means that Arsenal don't need to bring in so many players. They need to bring in more quality. And so 4 players will probably be enough, you know? So let's go ahead and jump in. There's already 134 of you guys in here, which is amazing. So like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let me just check and see. Okay, it looks good. We're good to go. So the first part of the conversation will be more about, you know, what is the reason why we didn't win the Premier League? Because, you know, my stance on this is not just like players that I want, it's players that are going to help us win trophies. And I think this is a really topical conversation, just because, like, obviously we didn't win the Premier League, but it has been difficult to watch other teams win trophies. And we've had this conversation multiple times on this channel about the idea that, like, it's not okay to just go out of cups. Trophies are what really matter. And we've kind of gotten into this place is like we're so enamored with the project, and we feel like it has to be like perfection and like, okay, well, we're doing this and this and this and this and this order, that we're forgetting that, like, you still need to win trophies, and like that's all that really matters. And I get that we went after the Premier League and things like that, but like, really, Arsenal just need to win some shit. Like, that's really just all that matters. So whether it's the Premier League, the FA Cup, you know, whatever it is, next season, we need to come out of there with silverware. And there's a reason why we didn't do that. And a lot of it had to do with depth. Some of it had to do with mentality and experience, but some of it was quality. And so the players that we're going to talk about are going to bring us the quality, maybe a little bit of that experience, maybe have the mentality, and those things mixed together with the players that we already have should get us closer to winning trophies. I know, like, it's a sensitive topic, but for me, like, talking about the 115 charges, for me, doesn't quite explain, like, it's not, to me, the reason why we didn't win the Premier League. Like, the reason why we didn't win the Premier League is because we weren't good enough. And Manchester City in the short term are not going to get any worse. So we need to figure out a way to raise our levels to get closer to them, and not just like always, oh, well, it's 115 charges, so what can we do? We could have done it. You know what I mean? And that's just where I'm at with it. 100%. Like, for me, that's where I'm at with it. But I know some people are like, okay, well, it's hard to compete with a team that's sports washing and stuff like that. But like, Manchester United are going to get new owners. Manchester City already have a state back ownership, and so do Newcastle. It's not going to get any easier. And I don't think we want to use that as an excuse for why we're not going to win things. Do you know what I mean? Nashville says fair, but I think we're going more offensive ace if we get Rice, a lot more Kiwi at left back. Exactly. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So I wrote down the 4 main reasons that I felt like we didn't win the league, right? And so I would say, like, the main one that we can start off with is the Saliba injury, because it's the one most fresh in the mind. And I think regardless to how people wanted to really like battle against the holding thing, the drop off from Saliba to holding was so massive, and like that ended up being like the biggest, I don't know, discrepancy in the squad, where I don't think many of us really thought that. Like, I think we thought when Jesus, got injured, that would be the one, Jesus to Nketiah, there's so much of a gap, but it ended up being fine because the way that we play, it wasn't, Jesus and Nketiah are not the type of strikers that you rely upon to score 20 plus goals. So as long as they can do, the pressing and create chances and finish off the odd chance themselves, we're usually fine up top. So that was okay. then I think people thought it was Thomas Partey. If we lose Thomas Partey, it's finished. But we ended up being okay with him for the most part. Like earlier on in the season, of course, when we went to Old Trafford, there was a big gap between Thomas Partey and Sambi. If you guys remember, Sambi played in that game, started in that game, and we missed him then. But when Sambi and El Neni stepped in for Thomas Partey when he was injured at the beginning of the season, or in that kind of beginning period before the World Cup, we were fine. It wasn't until we lost Saliba where it got really, really real. And so the drop off between Saliba and Holding is probably the first thing that needs to be addressed. And I thought earlier the easiest way to fix that would be just to bring in a center back, but I actually think bringing in a right back is probably the easiest way to do it because Saliba to White is a lot closer. White has already been in the squad. He doesn't need any sort of adaptation. He already has a relationship with Gabriel, and I think if you're talking about taking Saliba out, if for some reason he was injured or needs a rest, the easiest way to bridge that gap is White because of the reasons that I just said. So what you want to do is instead of buying a center back, buy a right back to replace Tomiyasu on that right side and just let Tomiyasu play on the left. And I think that's actually why we're seeing more links to right backs like Sasha Bowie and Fresneda and Cancelo and Castagna versus left back or the center back. I actually think it'll end up just being a right back because White, those last couple of games that we saw him playing center back, it just reminded me of how good he is there. He is I think the poster child of what an Arteta player is, technically sound, athletic as well, has the physicality to compete, but also can play multiple positions at a high level. And so I actually think we don't need to bring in a center back. We need to bring in a right back. That would probably be the easiest way to nip that in the bud. Akata says, I agree, Saliba and Tommy getting injured were huge losses. Boy says Saliba getting injured and Zinchenko having to play traditional positioning towards the end of the season showed up the weak midfield. Xhaka and Partey were never going to win the league as a center midfield pair. Everything has a ripple effect. So it's never just one thing. That's why I know when people are like, well, it's not can't just be Holding because, Saka's not playing well and so-and-so's not playing well. Look at Thomas Partey. But there's usually a ripple effect. Once something that's severe is broken, it kind of ripples through the team and your ability to combat that and I think stay afloat during those periods has to do with the other players that you're able to bring in. So even though Kivior wasn't perfect, we know he wasn't perfect. He was still a better option than Holding. And we were able to kind of sustain our level a little bit better, but we were really broken without a good center back pairing. And I think that's something that really needs to be fixed. So that's the first thing, but bringing in a right back is probably the best option for that. And the right back that I would probably say would be my number one option would be Cancelo. And the reason for that is because he is a level raiser. And Castagna for me is more of a squad option and Cancelo is somebody that takes you to a completely different level. Now, attitude issues aside, I don't need everybody reminding me of the issues that he had with Pep. I get that. And quite frankly, the players, the better that they get, the more you're exposed with better players, you tend to have to deal with different personalities. I think it's very few and far between where you'll have an entire squad that everybody just gets along with the manager. Everybody's just happy all the time. It just doesn't happen. But if we're going to go for a right back, I would say to get the most bang for your buck, if you're going to spend 20 million on Castagna, you might as well just add a couple more million and go ahead and get Cancelo because he's just that much better. And there was a period of time where people considered him one of the best in the world. It was Trent, it was Reece, it was Davies, it was so-and-so, and it was Cancelo as well. What I like about him is that he can play on both sides. And so if something were to happen to Zinchenko, but we still wanted to invert on that side, we could do that with Cancelo. I think the right back that we bring in has to be able to play on both sides, has to be able to play inverted. We already have the more center back option in Ben White. So the inverted option has to be somebody that can play like a midfielder. And there's really nobody better than Cancelo out there on the market that you can get to do that. Now, I know a lot of people, kind of feel like, then what happens to Ben White? Do you know what I mean? Um, and I kind of think about that as well. Like, if you were to bring in somebody like Cancelo that's on a different planet, do we expect him to start all the time? That's the issue. Cancelo is not going to come to Arsenal and sit on our bench. So I do think that that would mean that Ben White would play. He'd be an option at right back and center back. That could, be something that, you know, people wouldn't love. But I do kind of agree with the original conversation that we had, that I can see a reason why you'd bring in Castagna, because he does have a similar profile in terms of being able to play on both sides, but the levels are just so different. And are we trying to go to the next level, or are we just trying to fill in squad spots? You know what I mean? Um, but I get that he's not going to be everybody's favorite because of the attitude issues and stuff like that. But I think if people are happy in the place that they're at, they don't have the attitude issues. And then so you solve that. Oh my God, it is boiling in here. I need a ponytail. Hold on. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. All this hair, I'm not going to make it. It is so hot in here. I have the windows closed because I don't want flies in here, and don't want all the noise. So I'm boiling for you guys. I'm boiling for you guys. So make sure you guys like this video because I am hot. Okay. Let's see what you guys are saying. James says Cancelo is definitely not the answer, and Ben White is the manager's right back, and rightfully so. That's why we are linked to squad boosting right backs. We're also linked to Cancelo, though. And it wasn't like, it was a couple of days ago where reports were actually coming out that we were in verbal talks with Manchester City for Cancelo. So that might be your feeling on it, is that we need a squad booster, not somebody that's going to be like a starting level right back. But that actually goes against what the reports are actually saying. Castagna was supposedly supposed to be getting accelerated. That didn't come from anybody reliable, but the reliable people, the likes of Fabrizio Romano and Ornstein, and a couple of the Sky Sports reporters have said that Cancelo is actually the player that we're looking at. Saida says, I don't mind Cancelo as a right back if we're going to sign both Rice and Caicedo. Both of them would support Saliba and Gabriel. Also, Cancelo contributes with goals, and it's all about optionality, you guys. So I'm not saying that you're going to play, like, you still need other options, right? So if you needed to close out a game, you could play Ben White there. You could play a different player there. It's just optionality. Right now, we don't have really the ability to invert on the other side because we only invert on the right, or we invert on the left. We don't invert on the other side. And at the end of the season, we saw that it looks like Arteta wants to have that option. And somebody that would give you the ability to do that would be Cancelo. Now, I know people have an issue with his defensive ability, but like, he's a better defender than Zinchenko. So there's that. Akata says the problem is neither Cancelo or Zinchenko will want to be benched since they can't play together. I feel like that this is, to me, this is like, I think the crux of it all is, are we too comfortable with the idea that we need to have starters and bench players? Or do we need to get to a point where players need to fight for their position, and when they're not playing, they just need to suck it up? Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like there is kind of like an underlying issue here where people don't want starters to come in, because that means that potentially their favorites or starters currently will have to either work for their spot or will have to sit on the bench. I think the next step for Arsenal is to have starting level players in most positions, and guys will just have to suck it up. That's how you get good rotation as well. If you have players that the manager is comfortable with using off of the bench, then you get more squad rotation. If we keep bringing in squad players that aren't that good, is Arteta going to be comfortable with using them, or is he going to refrain from doing it and run our starting 11 into the ground? I think White isn't an issue. That's the thing. It's like, White isn't an issue. I don't feel like he needs upgrading upon, but another option would be great. And if that other option is a top player, why not? You know, why not? It's crazy. Like, I feel like that is the next level that we need to get to. Are we building a Champions League level squad, or are we making another Europa League squad? you know? And I'm not like, for me, I'm not saying either way because I can see the reasons why you do either one. I kind of lean a little bit more towards buy top quality and suck it up and work for your spot. Some people feel like that doesn't bring the harmony, and you want to have mostly like your starters and then backup squad options. Hey, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Let's see. Boy says we all lost our collective shit when Wenger in his final years because he would remove players from the top layer of our squad and add players to the bottom. Magzino says Zinni is a better defender than Cancelo. Cancelo is ATL Miami level stripper. I actually don't agree with that at all. I actually think Cancelo is a better defender, but he's not a great defender, if that makes sense, Let's see. Let's see what you guys are saying. Coach Dave says until the fan base is okay with whoever's sitting because they're not informed, the team won't win ish. Yeah, it just depends. Like, I feel like obviously Manchester City have tons of quality everywhere, and that's partly because they're a well-run club and we have to get real. Like, they've just bought really well. It's not like Arsenal could not have bought Akanji. It's not like Arsenal could not have bought certain players. Like, we just don't. So it's a little bit of the way that they're run and also the money that they have available to them. But then I look at other teams across Europe that maybe are a little bit more similar to us, and they still have more quality on their bench than we do. Maybe they don't have Manchester City level depth, but they definitely don't have the depth that we have. So I do think there's a level to go up in terms of Arsenal. That doesn't necessarily mean that every single player has to be world class that's on the bench, but we could do a little bit better to inch a little bit closer. But yeah, I think Cancelo would be a great option. Again, he doesn't have to, it doesn't mean that you play Zinchenko and Cancelo all the time. I think players have to get used to fighting for their spots, different horses for different courses. Sometimes if you're going to play against like a Matoma or a really good dribbler or something like that, maybe you don't play Cancelo, you play somebody else, but that would be my option because that option takes us up a level. If we went with Castagna, we went with Castagna. I could understand why, but he wouldn't be my number one choice. It would more likely be Cancelo. So let's look at some of his numbers. I think this is kind of interesting. You guys know I like my FB ref. You guys know it's my jam. So I hate that they have like these little things at the bottom. Pisses me off. Yeah, that's a lot of green bars, that's a lot of green bars. I mean, he's a top player. It's just a matter of, does he want to play for Arsenal? I'm sure we're not his number one choice, but we may end up being his only choice, because a lot of the teams, they have fullbacks that they really want. Like earlier we had spoken about the fact that Barcelona want him, but only on a loan because they can't afford him. And that's really the issue right now, is that Europe, like outside of the Premier League, nobody can really buy your players. So if you put them on big money and you put a big price tag on them, it's usually a Premier League club that will be able to pick them up, right? But in terms of passes attempted, passes completed, progressive passes, progressive carries, successful take-ons, I mean, he is the top 90 something percent, in almost every single category. He's also pretty good with aerial duels won. His tackles and interceptions are not awful, but if you have him in your squad, you're playing him more as a midfielder. You're playing inverted. Players that he's similar to, Estupinian. Personally, for me, Estupinian is an excellent player. I would love him at Arsenal, but you have Reece James, Mizraoui, another midfielder kind of player that plays right back for Bayern Munich, Alphonso Davies, Guerrero, Hakimi. I mean, he's pretty similar to a lot of the top players out there. So, it's probably he's probably the best option in terms of top quality that we could look for in this window. You could go for a younger option, somebody a little bit more like up and coming. But is that really what Arsenal need right now, or do they need ready-made players? You guys can let me know what you think about that. But that is that's one of the players that I would go for if I wanted to win the league. And Anthony97, who looks like a Liverpool fan, says Arsenal, the only one chance they had to win the league and they bottled it. Fair enough. Saideep says Zinchenko can take Xhaka's place as a left 8. Um, let's see. Philip says, I can't see Cancelo signing for you without a guaranteed of a regular starting spot. If City are prepared to sell him to you, although he's not the greatest at defending, but he would be a good signing. Yeah, I mean, it just depends on where Arteta sees Ben White. And, you know, we're going to get to a point with this team where we need to get comfortable with some players not always starting, and maybe Ben White is one of those. Maybe he will play, maybe sometimes Saliba will play, maybe sometimes Ben White will play at right back. Maybe that's the view for the future. Again, like, this is not a link that I made up. This is a link is out there. So if that's the case, then even maybe Arteta's thinking, how do I make sure that my backline doesn't, has all the optionality that I need, but also if players get injured, we have the right players available to make sure that we don't fall off of a cliff, So there you go. There's 360 of you guys in here. Make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. So yeah, my first signing would be Cancelo, because he definitely takes you up a level, and that's what Arsenal need. Now, I think midfield on transitions was another reason why I felt like we really fell off, like, post the World Cup. After that, it felt like we weren't really defending transitions as well. And I understand that the way that we play and the way that we sit at the halfway line and kind of defend with 2 center backs, and like, it's just like, you know, full speed ahead. If they get by you, they get by you. But at the beginning of the season, it did feel like we defended those transitions a little bit better. I thought that that was because you had a fresher Thomas Partey, and the space in midfield was a lot more condensed. It was different. Like, it felt like we had a little bit more stability. Post the World Cup, if you basically kicked a straight ball into the channels, you were in on goal. And if it wasn't for Ramsdale, some of the saves that he made, I think we would have been a lot worse off, last season. So you have the transitions in midfield, that I think that was an issue. Sometimes it just kind of felt like you could easily get by Thomas Partey and Xhaka, and you were in on goal. And then away from home against the likes of like Newcastle, Liverpool, City, United, you have to have a combative midfield. Like, you can't just want to play pretty all the time. You have to have something a little bit different. And I think that's why Arsenal fans are so obsessed with getting Rice and Caicedo, because that does solve that issue. Rice on his own does not solve that, but Rice plus Caicedo does solve it. You would have 2 midfielders that cover ground, good at intercepting, good tacklers, good ball winners, all the things that you need in order to go away from home to the big grounds and get points on the board. And so I think that's pretty much the next signings that we need to be looking at is Rice and Caicedo. We're linked to them. I don't know whether or not Arsenal are truly interested in bringing in the 2 of them, but that would be a statement in itself. 2 of the up and coming young midfielders that are kind of like all around central midfielders. And we've spoken about this before. Arsenal need less specialists. They need more all-arounders. They need players that can kind of do a lot of things, and at a very high level. I think a good example of an all-arounder, like a midfielder of like today, is like Enzo Fernandez. He's somebody that can kind of do everything. He scores goals. He's defensively good and sound. He has a good passing range. That is the type of midfielder you need, a couple of those. And right now, Arsenal have quite a few specialists, like Xhaka, very specialized, and more of a deep line playmaker that we've converted into a more attacking midfielder. But really, he doesn't have an all-around game. Thomas Partey is probably the closest player that we have that has an all-around game, but even he has some frailties, especially like when it comes to agility and covering space. The 2 of these guys are all-arounders, and with some more development, who knows what they really could be. These are the 2 players that, I would be looking to bring in to stop the transitions from killing us, and also being able to go to the big grounds, get points, because you know, we were much better against the top teams this season, but I still felt like we were kind of a soft touch in some games. We got ran through a little bit and we were very open. And these two would definitely change that. Let's see what you guys are saying. I'm sure everybody's like, of course, that's who we need. That's who we need. You know, let's see. RMB says, honestly, to compete with City, we need both Caicedo and Rice, both of whom are together costing 170 million. Also, need a defender and right-sided forward alongside the two midfielders. Tony said, I only shop at Walmart for Caicedo. Mario says, if we can get both of them, we can go on and win. Yeah, it's one of those, where I can see why Arsenal oh, and I see people are saying like Enzo are not a good defender, Enzo is shit. You guys don't kid yourself. Like I know that it's cool to like act like we don't see that there's good players that exist on other teams, but Enzo Fernandez is a top player. Like he's at Chelsea right now and Chelsea are struggling, but like he is not shit, you guys. Like and he's a good all-around midfielder that they probably overpaid for, but there's a reason why they overpaid for him. But I think that he's pretty good, defensively. He has a good passing range, and the numbers are there to prove it. I will show them to you now. You guys, I'm not really that into acting like players are not good when they're not. The blocks and the tackles. I mean, you can't really dispute that. Passes attempted, passes completed, progressive passes. I mean, he's a good all-around midfielder. You can't really deny that. But that's kind of what you need, in order to really compete at the top level. I think we are still kind of a soft touch. And like we kind of talked about earlier, Thomas Partey and Xhaka have a ceiling. They definitely had a ceiling and they reached it. The two of them together, they kind of need each other. Thomas needs Xhaka and Xhaka needs Thomas Partey. Like the two of them together work really well, but there's definitely a ceiling there. And so you get some all-arounders in there that can cover the ground, that are young, energetic, and then I think you really turn Arsenal into a different proposition, especially going away from home. Neil says, if we miss out on Caicedo, I'd like us to go for Kone or Thuram, the two players that, Liverpool are heavily linked with. Matt G says, Enzo is quality. He's consistently the best player on the pitch. Admittedly, he's in a bad Chelsea team, but he's brilliant. Snowbuzz says, potential alternative, Sufyan, Amrabat, and Martin Zubamendi. Here's the thing is, I don't even want to start talking about the alternatives to these two if we don't get them, because I need to feel like we're going to get them. If you don't get Caicedo, I think we do get Rice. If you don't get Caicedo, then you do miss out on the opportunity to bring in somebody that can play DM, can also play central midfield. Like he can also play in the 8 position, he can play the 6 position, and he can also play fullback. And so I don't think an Amrabat or Zubamendi give you that. And so that's why I think you have to go for Caicedo a little bit harder. And then, the other two maybe you can look at later. But these are the two that I would go for. And this is why I'm saying like 3 or 4 players might be what you can do. But these two players, because they can play in so many different positions, become much more attractive at the prices that they're at. Declan Rice, he can play in the 8 position, the 6 position, or center back. That is very useful for a team that tends to get tons of injuries when it really matters. So that's what makes him super attractive. He's also somebody that he needs development. We spoke about this. He's not the finished article, but like the raw qualities of Declan Rice are so good that I feel like if you give him a good manager that's going to allow him to be a little bit more progressive, to use his ball carrying abilities and stuff like that, whether he plays in the 6 or the 8 position, I do think that he could become one of the best in the world. And then you have Moises Caicedo, who also has a lot of that versatility to him. Like I already said, he can play fullback, he can play different midfield positions, and he's only going to get better. That's why the Zubamendis and those kind of guys, they're not as attractive, is because they can't play multiple positions. They are what they are. And I think the versatility is what makes the team so much better. Everybody thinks that Manchester City have like 25 world-class players and they just have like 2 11s. They really don't. They have 16 to maybe 18 players that Pep really trusts, and almost all of them can play multiple positions. You look at Gundogan, he can play the 8 position, he can also play 6. Foden can play wide, but he can also play midfield. Bernardo Silva can also play wide, but he can also play midfield. Kevin De Bruyne can play false 9, wing, 10. He can play all those positions. John Stones can play everything from striker to goalkeeper. Like, that is what makes a strong squad, and I think that's how we replicate that in our own way, is not necessarily to have so many players, but to have really quality players that can play multiple positions at a high level. Snowbuzz says Amrabat is similarly mobile and quite versatile. Played center back, mid, and right back. With Zubamendi, you get a bit more creativity from deep. Yeah, Zubamendi is kind of like a more physical version of Jorginho. You know, that's what he looks like to me. I didn't know that about Amrabat, but he does have that versatility. That's great. The one thing that I did read about him, though, is that he has his heart set on playing in Spain. And so I don't necessarily feel like he'd be that interested to coming to London. But yeah, there you go. Tailwood says Anthony Nunez definitely wasn't worth what you paid for them. Okay, so you guys, but you paid what they wanted to sell him for me. Okay, so you guys are talking about Anthony and Nunez. Yeah. I don't really rate Anthony that much, but I think Nunez is a great player. I don't know why people talk about him so poorly. Medi says Arsenal should go for Cancelo and Gundogan, Man United fan. Gundogan, I think just he stays at Man City. I just don't see him leaving. But Cancelo, he is a player that I think that we can bring in if we get to a fee that Manchester City would be open to. You know, I saw that Arsenal don't want to play more than 30, and Manchester City want like 50 euros or something like that. So there's some distance there. But yeah, like I think those two players would completely change how we are on transition, how we show up to the big away grounds, especially the ones up north, the versatility that we'll have. Like, those are the types of players that you want to go for. Gurney says Declan Rice is, in my opinion, is not worth 100 million. If I was Arsenal, I would bring in Douglas Luiz for the season and maybe bring in Rice the next season, though everyone wants Rice. 100 million is too much. I don't know why we do that. Like, if he wants to come to Arsenal and he wants to come now, I don't know why we'd wait another season. And Douglas Luiz, although was last minute, kind of like at the last minute type of, target for Arsenal, he's not a target for us now. And we're on a different trajectory now. So I get that a lot of people don't feel like Declan Rice is worth 100 million, and I can understand why. I still feel like football fans are still caught up in a couple of years ago where the best players went for 60, 70 million. Now the best players go for 100. You can thank the likes of Man United for buying Anthony, and Liverpool buying Nunez, and Chelsea buying Enzo Fernandez and Mudryk, because those fees have now set the market in a way that the top young players are going for these fees. So whether you think he's worth it or not, that's what the market dictates. And what you're buying is the potential. A lot of big clubs are now buying players probably too expensively. Remember, like Real Madrid bought Enric. He's a 16-year-old Brazilian kid for like 60 million. So people are buying potential. That's just what people are doing now. And that's exactly what we'd be doing with Declan Rice. Not necessarily like you can't see what he'd be like, but he's definitely not the finished article. But that's just kind of how the game is now. Things have changed. So yeah. Dre Stay says, if Arsenal sign either of these players, I'd be shocked. Arsenal don't have a good track record of paying massive transfer fees. Fair enough. I think we have the money. So yeah. Neil says, doesn't matter what fans think players are worth. It really doesn't. I mean, sometimes I do think that you want to bring, like, I don't know what it is, but like, if the player is going to like change the club and put you in a position where you can compete, I don't know why we'd be worried about the fee. I think we're a little bit burnt from the Pepe experience, but you could have seen that coming from a mile away. It's not the player that the manager wanted. He had one good season. you could see that coming from a mile away, really, like that he wasn't as good as we thought. We overpaid, whatever, but like that's not going to happen every single time that you buy a top player, that or a really expensive player. It doesn't always happen. So yeah, but those two players are definitely the ones that I'd look at. I thought that this was interesting from Squawka, that they had the radars for Odegaard, Caicedo, and Declan Rice. And although I still think that Arteta does want to play with two attacking eights and a six, this does show you that if you were to put the three of them in midfield, that you'd have pretty much everything covered, So it would be great to be able to get these two. And then you still have the likes of Emile Smith-Rowe and Vieira, who, whether you love them or not, are still young players that just probably deserve more playing time so that they can get, going, because we know that both of them are talented. It's just a matter of like one needs to adapt and the other one needs to get over their injuries. But them with Thomas Partey, maybe even Jorginho, if they stay, is a good group of midfielders to go into next season with. So like I already said, Cancelo for sure is a player that would bring in Caicedo and Declan Rice. Yeah, I would love to see those come in. And again, these are the types of players that I feel like help you win the Premier League, help you win big trophies, help you sustain challenges for long periods of time. Those are the ones. Gurney says, how would you feel if Arsenal went for Mudryk again? Would you be happy or would you be disappointed? I don't know. I just feel like he made his choice and he should stay at Chelsea. We should be looking at other players. Yeah, he made his choice. I think I'd be surprised more than anything if Arsenal went for him because I just don't think, I would be very shocked. He just got there. I'm sure that they want him to like develop there. I'm sure if he were to leave there, he'd leave on loan to like another team so that he can develop a little bit more because you can tell he's really raw. I would just be more surprised than anything, but I'm over the Mudryk thing. Like we didn't get him, and hopefully he has a terrible career at Chelsea. Do you know what I mean? Saham says, I'm not a huge fan of us getting both Rice and Caicedo. I'd rather get someone like Barella alongside of them. Yeah, I mean, if you want more of like an attacking option, I can totally understand that too. Like, but again, we've spent quite a bit of money on Vieira, and Emile Smith-Rowe is somebody that I think deserves another season. So, we do have options to play in the 8 that are a little bit more attacking. We just don't trust those options as much. But we don't really have players like Rice and Caicedo. Like we don't have players like that. So either kind of rebuy players that we've already kind of brought in, or somebody like Emile Smith-Rowe, we buy players that are similar to them because we don't trust them and put them in the team, or we spend the money on players that we literally don't have any sort of analog for in the group. Your choice. Let's see. Boy says, forget about Mudryk already. Gunner9 says, what if we don't win with these 4 signings? I mean, well, let's actually get them first. Like, UD says, what do you think a reasonable offer for Rice is? 70-80 million. Yeah, like 85-90 million. I feel like because I actually think he's worth the money, but I view signings different than like most people. Like I'm not really concerned about like, oh, they need to be super cheap or anything like that. I think about first of all, what is there out there that's similar to this player? Because the market kind of demands like if you look at supply and demand, there's not a lot of players like Declan Rice out there. That's why so many teams are looking at him, because there's not a lot of players like that. So once one gets picked off, another one gets picked off, then the player that's available becomes more and more expensive. No Jude, no Enzo Fernandez, the pickings are slim. So I'll automatically feel like he's more valuable. So I feel more okay with spending more money. Then I actually think potential England captain. Like I said, he's an all-arounder. He can also play multiple positions. Those things make players more valuable. And so when I look at, if I would think like a standard DM, like a Paulinho or an Edson Alvarez is going to go for 50-60 million, then I'm pretty sure that I think that Declan Rice would go for closer to 100 because he's better and has more potential, has not even reached his prime yet, so I think 85-90 million is probably about what I'd start off with. But I think differently about these types of things because one, it's not my money, and two, I'm not concerned about being like super cheap all the time. Like, I'm trying to spend somebody's cash. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Terrence says, would you be surprised if Chelsea finishes in the top 5? They need to get rid of players and use this year to retool. No, I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea finished in the top 5. Like I'm not a hater. Like, I'm a hater, but I'm not a hater. Like, no Europe, lots of talented players. Pochettino knows how to work with young players and get a lot out of them. Why can't they finish in the top 5? Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they did. Next season could be really, really difficult, So, that's another reason why Arsenal need to go ahead and spend the cash. So, the next type of player I think we need to bring in is an attacker, but what type of attacker? And this conversation can sometimes get a little, I think, I wouldn't say it gets a little bit like heated just because people are convinced that we need this big tall striker, right? And part of me does feel like we need it as well, but I don't know if we need it now. I think we need a player that can probably play 8-10, maybe center forward, maybe on the wings. I think we need more of a versatile attacker than the big number 9. One, I don't think the striker market is that great at the moment, and I think that's more what Arsenal need because you kind of need maybe cover at 8-10, you need cover maybe down the center, you need cover on the right wing for Saka. So, and like I said, if you get Caicedo and Rice and then you throw in Cancelo, who's not going to be cheap, then the next player has to be able to kind of do quite a bit of things. And so that's why I would look at somebody like a Xavi Simons, somebody like that, because he can play all those positions. He's young, obviously. So he may not be the finished article, but because you're already bringing in Rice and Caicedo, who are kind of players that we know can play in the Premier League and are kind of ready to go. They're young, but they're ready to go. You could bring in a player like this that's very highly talented, very high ceiling, can play multiple positions, scores lots of goals, gets lots of assists, and he can play off of either wing. He can play down the center. He can play 8-10 as well. And just add another really talented player to the group because why not? He'd kind of be like, I think a Foden type player in our team because I don't really think we have a player like that. But yeah, like somebody like a Xavi Simons, I think would round out the transfer window quite well. Cancelo, Rice, Caicedo, Xavi Simons, and you're done. But I know some people are dead set on bringing in a number 9. I don't think a number 9 comes in, even if Balogun goes. I just don't think it's on the cards. Like I'm not feeling it. We're not really linked to any, but we are linked to players like this because not only have we been linked to Xavi Simons, we've been linked to Kai Havertz, and we've also been linked to Dominic Szoboszlai. All 3 of these players and Mason Mount, all of them are very similar. They can play 8-10. They can play off either wing. They're more of like a catch-all type of player. And I think that's what we're going to look at for that last position. I don't think it's going to be an out-and-out winger. I also think the winger market is quite bad. And that's why it's so important. Like, it's so good that we have the like Saka and Martinelli because, I mean, Diaby's not that great. Every time I watch him play, I'm so like not convinced by him. And this is the type of player that's going to go for 60 million, or they think he's going to go for 60 million. I'd rather bring in a highly talented player that we know is good, that can play multiple positions instead of go for like a Diaby that can only play one position. That's probably not that good. That might end up being another Pepe. I don't think Rafinha is actually going to be sold, so maybe bring in one of these types of guys. Society Sniper says Gross and Bowen. What about Bowen? Boy says Xavi Simons is more than just a prospect. Yeah, I'm not saying he's a prospect. I'm just saying like he's a young player that has like his whole career ahead of him, and like he's obviously going to get better. He's definitely not like somebody that we've never heard of before. He's been around for a long time. P Trim says, Jess, we need Rice and Caicedo just to stay in the top 4. We need other top players added to the squad. A solid defense from the entire season is crucial. Already spoken about the defense. Obviously, I'll show you like the full lineup and, all the options, substitutions, so we could kind of see that it covers the scope of everything that you kind of need. No, it's not 5, 6, 7 players, but you don't need that if the players can play multiple positions. That's my feeling. Gunner9 says, we have Pepe, don't need to buy anyone, integrate him back in the team and get more season. We have a lot of games. Pepe is shit. He's not going to play for Arsenal ever again. We're going to cancel his contract. He was awful in France when he went back. I think that's enough of an indication that he's just not good enough and we made a mistake. Like, Pepe is not going to play for Arsenal and we don't need to reintegrate him back in. He's not good enough. Tony says, Miami just bought a really good attacker. Get him on loan. Exactly. Prime Henri says Gnabry or Kulusevski are options. I actually don't think Kulusevski is an option, although Spurs are trying to get the price down for him, and it's not set in stone for him to be there. Like he's going to most likely be at Spurs. And I don't know if you guys have watched Gnabry recently. He's lost his burst. He's not necessarily as dynamic as he was. He's still a good player. He plays for Bayern. Like, of course, he's a good player. But I don't think that's a player that we should go back to. I think that there's better players that we could get, that are not going to hit their, where they start to take their downturn as soon as we buy them. I know it's a great story to want Gnabry back. A lot of people are still like, I wish we would have, kept him, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, when I watch him play, I don't see a player that I would necessarily want back at Arsenal, but that's just me. Who's calling me? Society Sniper says, if they can't get both target Rice and Caicedo, I would prefer Caicedo. What about you? Do you see that debate? Yeah, like I think a lot of people would prefer Caicedo still, but like I think I'd prefer Rice. Just in general, I just have the feeling that he's going to be like a really good player for us. Caicedo is obviously amazing, but the one thing that Rice has that Caicedo does not, that people don't necessarily care about, but I think is important, is the leadership aspect of things. We're going to lose huge personality in Granit Xhaka, and that needs to be replaced. And so if I'm thinking about all things considered, versatility, ceiling, like how good I think the player could be, how good the player is now, and the fact that, we're going to lose a big personality, I would still go with Rice. But I think we need both, for sure. And Joseph says, get Sane. I think Sane would be better than Gnabry. Something about him, he's lost his burst. He's not as good. Saida says, I can see City signing Kulusevski if they lose Mahrez. I actually think they'll sign, try to go for Michael Olise. I think he would be a better option for them for replacing Mahrez. But we're talking about us, we're talking about us. So yeah, I would love to bring in a player like this. I think he's excellent. Also has, the world at his feet, could become anything. And he's just getting started. Maybe Darren Dean can do us a favor for once and bring in somebody like this. But the thing with Xavi Simons is obviously PSG have the leg up because I think they have the buyback on him. But also like his future is in his own hands. If he doesn't want to go to PSG, then he doesn't have to. But, PSV have gotten a new manager. So we won't know much about him probably for another couple of weeks or so. But I mean, 19 goals and 8 assists is like nothing to laugh at. And he absolutely annihilated us. Like when we played him in the Europa League, I think he's the type of player I think Wenger would really like as well. So yeah, he has a bit of that about him. Prince Tutu says, we are not buying Madison. No, we're not. Ikao says, don't you think Arteta will sell Xhaka? No way. Don't think Arteta will sell Xhaka. No way. I mean, he's basically gone. So yeah. And I'm happy for Xhaka to go. I think we need to move on. So yeah. Boy says, you have to get Tony back to fitness starting in Feb. What makes anybody think we will not have that time? So people are talking about him as well. So yeah, like those are the players that I would definitely go for. And I think those are the players that will help you compete for the Premier League and win it. There's 400 of you guys in here. Make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, I wanted to kind of show you guys I'm too big here. Hold on. Make me a little bit smaller. So you guys can actually see. Can you guys see that now? Okay, cool. So, here we go. Oops, I forgot to put in Ramsdale. I was rushing. So yeah, like obviously, like we kind of talked about making sure that we have options at center back that make sure that we don't have to see any sort of drop off that we saw with Saliba and Holding. And obviously, like, so this is not what I would do. Like, I wouldn't put Cancelo and Zinchenko playing together. I don't think we'd ever play like that. But this is just to show you guys the players that we would have. So, like, we don't need to, oh my God, Zinchenko and Cancelo together, we would die. Like, this is not exactly what we would do, right? But obviously, Cancelo coming in, starting at right back. And then you also have Caicedo that can play more of the good 1v1 defender. So that was another thing, is that I had written on my list that even though we need to be able to invert on both sides, we also need to be able to defend one-on-one on both sides. And right now, like, if Tomiyasu is fit, he's actually better on the left, and he's a really good 1v1 defender on that side, and he's good at defending against players that like to cut in on their left. So when he played against Salah, he was very good, and I think that's what you want to use him for on the other side. Caicedo can actually do that on the opposite side as a good 1v1 defender. We saw him play right back for Brighton. He can do it. You know, you would have a shutdown defender on one side, a shutdown defender on the other side. You can invert on both sides with either Zinchenko or Cancelo. You wouldn't do both, but you have the option to do both. Then you have your number one center back pairing in Gabriel and William Saliba. And then you have Kiwior and White, who both can also play either right back or left back. You're covered. You're good to go. Like, you don't need any more than that, I don't think. I think you're in a good position there. And even if like worse came to worse and everybody was injured, you can still put Thomas Partey at right back. You can also put Declan Rice at center back if something were to happen. In midfield, you have the options of Odegaard, Caicedo, and Rice, which is your combative midfield. If you're going somewhere and you're like, I'm not trying to get bullied today, you can also play Thomas Partey. So I don't think Thomas Partey is getting dropped anytime soon, but this is just for the sake of showing you guys. Partey is there, and then you have Vieira and ESR. I know people are not high on Vieira. I don't give a shit. I'm keeping my stocks. ESR said he's working out. Hopefully he becomes a really good option for us next season, because we know how talented he is. And then up top, you have Martinelli and Jesus and Saka. I don't think that's changing. And then Reece Nelson, who signed a new deal and deserves way more playing time, can actually deputize on both sides. You have Xavi Simons, who can play on both sides, but also play in midfield. And then you have Trossard as your backup center forward. I don't have Nketiah on there, but quite frankly, I don't expect Nketiah to play very much next season. Trossard is a better center forward option and more similar to Gabriel Jesus. So he's not on there, but he's there, if that makes sense. And I think this team can win some shit, you know? What do you guys think? What do you guys think? O'Malley says Mohamed Kudus is versatile left-footed winger. Yeah, he's a good player. I'd prefer Xavi Simons, but if you prefer Kudus, then you prefer Kudus. I think Xavi Simons is so much better than Kudus. Johan says United, Liverpool, and Chelsea will be about next season as well. Yeah, I think everybody will get better, of course. Mark says Partey, Rice, and Caicedo rotating DM and one box-to-box real solid. That's what I think as well. Lucas says Ben Jacobs tweeted Caicedo will be 70 plus 10 add-ons. Both us and Chelsea will bid. Interesting. Ooh, getting spicy. Joe says somebody talk to me about Lakanga. Hopefully Burnley come and get him, because Vincent Kompany is the one who, told us to come and get him, and he's not good enough. So there you go. Prime Henri says Xavi Simons, praying hands. Tony says cheeky Joao Felix. Something about Joao Felix. I think the good thing is like we're able to see him in the Premier League without having to actually like pay the money ourselves, because I thought he's really talented, but he doesn't have the end product necessary. We have enough players, I think, that are not necessarily clinical. So I don't know if if that's what we need. Like, you know what I mean? But he is very talented. So yeah. Marco says you could invert both against Everton playing 9 at the back. Gabriel Saliba and Caicedo essentially stay back most of the time. I'd play that team 90% of the time. Johan says still not good enough to win the league. If you don't think this is good enough to win the league, I think you're high. Like, I know people are like, well, we need a number 9. Like, we scored more than enough goals last season to win the league. We just couldn't defend for our lives. Like, I think midfield being upgraded with 2 highly talented, midfielders, and then a new right back, and another really good attacker, and you're good to go. I don't know why this team can't win anything. So yeah, but I get some people just want to be forever negative and feel like, who do you think we need to go out there and buy to like make this team so much like this team is really good. Yeah. Yo-Yo says the biggest difference between City and the rest of the pack is Pep. Klopp was briefly able to take trophies off of him with an inferior squad. Fair enough. That's also like another thing too is like Arteta has to do his job. If he's not good enough and he doesn't improve and doesn't use the squad properly, then we won't win shit. But these are the tools that I feel like he would need in order for there to be no excuses. So yeah. Dano says if Arsenal sign just Caicedo and Rice, then RIP EPL. Lucas says, I'm 60-40 Kudus over Simmons. Both are very, very good players. Like, if Kudus were to come in, like, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't get Simmons, but that's the player that I like a little bit more. But, everybody has feelings and opinions, Boss Bubla says, hi, Jess, brilliant show as usual. If Arsenal do the right signing this summer, trust me, we will get the league. Bless you, Gunners for life. Fair enough. Tailwind Studio says the only thing I can't get my head around is the fact that Lukonga was captain at Anderlecht before we signed him. I can't believe how duped we were. Like, yeah, that was not a great signing. It really wasn't. But at the same time, like, you win some, you lose some, and hopefully Burnley come in with a 15 million pound bid and take him off of our hands. But I just don't think he's a Premier League player. Like, I think he needs to be in Serie A or something where he has tons of time on the ball. I think he needs to be in a double pivot where he has somebody more defensive next to him. I just think he really struggled. But, it just is what it is. Like, sometimes things don't work out, Snowbuzz says Romeo, Lavia, and Kudus. Those are 2 good options as well. The only thing about Lavia that I'm not quite sure about is, I feel like he's not as physical as Caicedo is, and I like the chip on the shoulder Caicedo has. But he's very, very good. And if we weren't able to get Caicedo, then it wouldn't be that bad to go over get Lavia. And Kudus is also good. I think just in general, Arsenal need to up the level of physicality, athleticism. Those things need to come into the team. And if you guys have noticed, like, in midfield for sure, like, that's what I went for. And then, like, obviously, like, Xavi Simmons is just a brilliant young player. And then Cancelo gives you the opportunity to have inversion on the left and the right, but he also is just a really good player. Diallo says, Jess, let's be honest, Fabrizio don't know shit about what's going on at Arsenal, and I love it. I wouldn't say that necessarily. I wouldn't say that he doesn't know shit. Yeah, I wouldn't say that he doesn't know shit. I think what happens a lot of times is he doesn't say what Arsenal fans want to hear, and then they decide he doesn't know anything. Terrence Hall says, Arteta is young like the players. He is learning, but trust the process. He is great at developing players. I think he is good at developing players. I think the main criticism of Mikel Arteta has mostly been his management of the squad. That's mostly what I've seen, in terms of knowing when to sub, knowing when to rotate, knowing how to keep players fresh, and things like that. I think our bench tends to be so stale that when you need to use them, they're so cold that they can't really give you anything off of the bench. But developing players is definitely not something that I worry about with Mikel Arteta. For sure. Kat Adrian says, I take Barea and De Jong over Rice and Caicedo, more experience. Yeah, I guess they have more experience. I just, obviously De Jong and Barea are great players, but neither of them are leaving the clubs that they're at, so, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. Nashville says it was a slip of the tongue saying labia. Did I say that? Maybe I did. I don't know. Yo-Yo says, need athleticism down the spine. City wanted trouble having a bunch of 6-footers on the pitch. Exactly. And it's just something that we haven't had in a very long time. And although our physicality and athleticism has gotten a lot better, it still could go a lot further. And that's why bringing in like a Declan Rice and Caicedo, he's not tall, but he's physical. That'll help. And you have Kivior, you have Tomiyasu, you have White, you have Gabriel and Saliba. All of them are 6 foot plus, really tall, like athletic players. And you can also use them across the back line and create kind of like a wall there. So again, you have options and you could do different things. And if you need to be more attacking, you can be more attacking. If you need to be more sturdy, you be more sturdy. Arsenal need optionality, and they need to be able to go away from home to the big sides and win ugly. And you can't win ugly if you have Zinchenko playing at left back. Like, it just doesn't work. You can't win ugly, I don't think, if you have Thomas Partey and Xhaka in your midfield. Like, you need more fighters, and that's really what we need. Let's see. Coconut said, I disagree. Disagree with what? Matt G, Diallo says his contracts are all from agents. Yeah, I mean, just because he doesn't get his information straight from Arsenal doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't know what's going on at Arsenal, does it? Like, you know what I mean? But I hear what you're saying, but I would say that most of the things that he does say is reliable, meaning even if he says it later on or somebody else, like, even if it's news that other people know about, like, he doesn't really say things that aren't actually happening, if that makes sense. Like, there's some people that we know of, like a Rudy Galletti or Nicolo Shira, like these guys that like have never gotten anything right in their whole lives, like, but they still have big followings for some reason. Fabrizio Romano's not like that. So when I say he's reliable, I mean the things that he speaks about usually does happen. He doesn't usually get things like super wrong or anything like that. You know what I mean? O'Malley says, would you consider Tyler Adams as an option for inverted right back? He was top 10 in tackles in the Prem until he got injured. I love Tyler Adams, but I think that's like not the level that we need, especially midfield. Midfield needs to be upgraded upon. And so if you want to upgrade on Xhaka and Thomas Partey, then the two players need to be not options. They need to be like starting level. I think Tyler Adams is somebody you bring in as a backup option, and that's not necessarily what we need in midfield. Lucas says, we'll love a winger with elite pace and ball striking, but I'm okay with that getting that this window if the midfield is sorted. I just don't see that player. I don't see that player. I would love to get a winger that is of that quality. I just don't see that winger available. So yeah. Let's see. Yo-Yo says, I don't want any player at the club that Arteta doesn't trust next season. It's time to deliver. Fair enough. Let's see. Yeah, so I mean, that's another thing is like I would love that winger that you guys are talking about. I just don't see that guy. I don't see that player available. So if that player is not really available, then I go for the next best thing, which is a versatile attacker that I know can play multiple positions, but is highly talented, and we know, can play like 3 or 4 different positions. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, Damon says Caicedo and Rice. We're so into it. Like, if we don't get them, I know we'll be devastated, but that's the game, isn't it? But yeah, you guys, like, those are just my thoughts. You guys have been asking me for weeks what would be my perfect window, and that's what it would be, amongst also like some sales, as well, like selling off more of the dead wood. You know, that's super important, and not necessarily making it a smaller squad, but making sure we have quality over quantity. Like, you just don't need a bunch of guys that the manager doesn't trust. Like Yo-Yo says, like, everybody needs to be trusted so that, they're used. And so we're not just running the same 13 guys into the ground anymore. But like I said, the team that I showed you guys, I think can win things. I know some of you guys disagree, but that is perfectly fine. Hopefully we have some updates on what's going on with Declan Rice or maybe even Caicedo soon. But you guys know, in the mornings, this morning I was able to get it out there by 10 a.m. UK time, which was great. but a little like update daily on all the transfer news. It's pre-recorded, and then in the afternoons we do a live. That's the best way, I think, for us to do content moving forward. If you guys have any suggestions or anything, you guys know I'm always open to that. You guys can get in the comments and let me know what will make the experience better for you. But make sure before you guys leave, make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, and all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed this. Talk to you guys tomorrow. And yeah, bye, guys.